Step one in our process, it's a 6-step process. So step one is to admit that there is an issue, to admit that I'm upset. And that's a challenge for most people, because most people are in the habit of saying it doesn't matter, or it's not a big deal, or I'll get over it, or I just let it go, or whatever people use as a normal coping strategy. We don't believe in coping, we believe in thriving. And coping is not very attractive to me. I've coped a long time, and here I am. Surviving is not very exciting to me either. I've survived a long time. Here I am 72 years later, almost 73 years later. So step one is to admit that I'm upset, that there is an upset. That could be a tiny ripple, a very minor irritation, or it could be a rage. But to acknowledge it and to immediately say, hey, there's something going on. I'm not at peace. That's step one.
The second step is it's about me, which is a huge step in admitting or looking at the fact that it is always about me. It's never about an outside circumstance or person, and it's really owning and taking on the responsibility for my experience can only come from me.
Step two is crucial and unspeakably difficult for almost every single person on the planet, and that is to immediately acknowledge that this is about me. This is not about what just happened. This is not about what my friend just said to me. This is not about the fact that the contractor doing a renovation of my house screwed me over and now cost me 50,000 more than he said it would. It's not about that. And that's incredibly difficult, because the ego has what it considers an unfailing radar to find the cause for an upset, and yet it has no idea what the cause is. It doesn't want me to know what the cause is. Because what the cause of the upset is always, 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 always a mistaken belief that I have about myself. That's where the upset comes from. So step two, it's about me, is absolutely essential and incredibly difficult. Because it means that I'm not blaming anybody anymore. I'm now taking it back. Now the reason step two works benevolently is because I'm not blaming anyone anymore, and more importantly, I'm also not blaming myself. Now how can I do that? I can only do that by recognizing that nothing ever goes wrong. Now that is a faith-based position. That is not a commonly held position from anybody on the planet, but it is what we work with. So nothing has ever gone wrong. That's incredibly strong and powerful, because that allows me to take it back. And it allows me to say, yes, this is about me, and something is being offered here. I just had a wonderful conversation with a friend of mine in Holland who's going through a divorce. And her partner is doing the normal divorce warfaring with a lawyer and threatening and all kinds of stuff. And she was wondering, how could she get through this and stay at peace? And so what we did very simply and very quickly was to say, this is about me. The upset that I'm feeling right now has nothing to do with what my husband is doing or what the lawyer is saying. This has to do with me. And then you move into step three. But taking it back, first of all, takes the projection out of the picture. So it's no longer somebody else's fault. It's no longer the fault of the government or my partner or whatever I thought it was. It's about me.
Step three is to be really attuned to the feeling that I'm feeling, to be really specific with what it is I'm upset about or what it is I'm sad about, what the specific feeling is.
And the feeling is essential, because I choose my feelings. And who is the I that chooses the feelings? The I that chooses the feelings is the ego. What is the ego? The ego is a set of beliefs. So one of my beliefs is triggered and chooses a feeling. That feeling becomes the justification for my reaction. So let's go back to my friend in Holland who is going through a divorce. Her reaction was one of rage. That was chosen by a belief that she made up when she was 3 or 4, and there was sexual abuse in the family, and she knew about it and she couldn't do anything about it, and then she felt weak and powerless and helpless. The same thing is playing out now. So when she and I, we worked for about 10 minutes on the phone. It took absolutely no time at all, because she immediately realized that this is not about the divorce. This is not about what my husband is saying or what the lawyer is writing. This is all about an old belief that I have, that I am helpless and worthless. And so she corrected that belief, and now she can look at what's happening in the divorce as if it's a neutral fact. which makes it a completely different experience. So feeling is essential. So the key to it is A, make it feel it really strongly. Second step within that step is to ask, is this a familiar feeling? And the answer has to be yes. I have felt this before. Absolutely. Once I say I felt it before, which always is the case, I always also immediately have taken the focus of what I think is happening right now and allowed myself really to reinforce step 2. This is about me. And the feeling I'm having is a familiar feeling. Now I'm ready to let go of what's happening right now, and now I'm ready to go deeper and find out where is this experience coming from.
Step 4 is to ask yourself, is it a familiar feeling? And to sort of recognize when the feeling was playing out in your life, maybe talk about the story a little bit. Sometimes it's a traumatic event from childhood. Sometimes it's nothing at all, of just a feeling of being abandoned can happen because your parents happen to go into another room. So it might not on the surface look like something very traumatic, but to a child, very simple things can be very traumatic and they get taken on and carried.
Step 4 is a fun step because now I'm asking my feeling, the feeling that I have in this upset, I'm asking that feeling to take me back to the first time I remember feeling it. That may not be the first time I felt it, but it's the first time I remember feeling it. And invariably, I would say 98% of the time, people come up immediately with, oh yeah, I'm 3 years old, my father just slammed the door, or whatever it is. There was something that happened. And at that moment, I made up a belief. So at that moment, I made up that I'm weak and powerless. At that moment, I made up that I'm not supported. I'll give you one beautiful little illustration of that. This was a man who was sent to me by another therapist who wasn't making any progress with him. And this man walked into my room in my office in Vancouver, and he looked miserable. He looked completely unhappy. He was in his early 40s. He was a financial analyst in New York. He was making, at that time, about $400,000 a year, which was a lot of money 15 years ago, and still is a lot of money. But he was miserable and deeply depressed. And he sat down and he said, I'm clinically depressed. What are you going to do about it? And I said, it's an interesting choice. Why do you think you're choosing that? And he said, no, you didn't hear me. I'm clinically depressed. My father was clinically depressed. My grandfather was clinically depressed. So I went back. It's an interesting choice. And he was visually agitated by that response, but he stayed with it. And by the end of the first session, he was willing and prepared to acknowledge the fact that maybe he did make it up. Maybe it was something that he had made up himself. That's key. So then we went to the next session. We said, okay, let's go to this feeling that you're having. What is the strongest feeling? The strongest feeling you have is absolutely no joy at all. So I said, great, let's take that back. When do you think you first felt that feeling of no joy? And he immediately said, I'm 3 years old. My father is a brain surgeon in Vancouver. He's a very important man. He has a very imposing, important office with leather furniture and bookcases and very impressive. I'm 3 years old. I'm playing in the garden. I found a little beetle. I came running into my dad's study and I said, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. I held up the beetle. My daddy turned his head around, raised an eyebrow. That was all it took. That's when he got the message. Fun and joy is not what we do. We are serious people. He believed that for 40 years. 2.5 or 3 years after that session, which was the end of our sessions because he now knew what depression was, he sent me a wonderful letter. It was a beautiful card that he had drawn himself. And he said, you won't believe what happened after our work together. I quit my job. I went back to university. I'm now a kindergarten teacher. I make $40,000 a year. I've never been so happy. So he turned his life around. That is what happens when you go back to when you first discover feeling this way, when you first remember feeling this way, and when you transform that experience. So it no longer is a seminal experience of unhappiness. It no longer is the genesis why I made up I'm not supported. It now becomes a neutral event. I run into my daddy's office with a beetle. He raises his eyebrow. What does it say? Nothing. It says he raised an eyebrow. He could have been busy, I don't know, but it said nothing about me. I'm no longer buying that interpretation. So that step is essential. Step 5 follows on the step 4 when I found out when I made up that I don't deserve to be loved, when I'm not important, that I don't matter, whatever my belief is that I made up. And then I do a forgiveness on that. So it goes, forgive me for believing that I'm unworthy. Forgive me for believing that I'm not lovable. Forgive me for believing that I don't matter. Forgive me for believing, and this is a ubiquitous one, everybody has that, for believing that I'm not good enough. It is not true. The response I give myself, because the process is designed to be done by yourself, the response I give myself is that it's not true. I made that up. I made that up that moment that my dad raised his eyebrow, but it's not true. That was a wrong interpretation. Who I am, in essence, is love. Remember that first principle, we always go back to that. Who I am, in essence, is love. That's who I am. I forgot. I made up another self. I made up a self that perhaps wasn't loved. I made up a self that perhaps should feel shameful. I made up a self that has reason to feel guilty. None of that is true.
Step 6 is to make a correction, and to basically just acknowledge that I took on an identity at that time because of some things that were happening in order for me to make sense of an environment I didn't understand. And there's nothing wrong with that. However, it's not serving me anymore, right? So it's really an acknowledgement to look at someone and say, hey, I can change my mind about this. Like, I feel bad that I carried it around for so long as baggage, but it's totally up to me to let it down, like put it down and stop telling the story. Yeah, so that's really, and that's the big one. And it's also, it's making a commitment to not keep being invested in the story as well, right? That 6th step is, yeah.
The last part of step 6 is embracing the truth, and that's where you make the shift into the spiritual awareness of who I am connected to the oneness.
The result of believing that leads me to a place of peace. And the result of reaffirming the truth within myself leads me to a place of greater joining and greater love within my life.